The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the official positions of the sponsors, advertisers, or presenters. Advertising does not imply endorsement by the sponsors and presenters.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Lighting Controls podcast. We have a little bit of a different twist for you today. We have a guest, technically, but all three of us in a way are kind of guests in this episode. You'll figure out more in a little bit. Today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And is financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. Got a lot of information, including about the lighting controls specialist, or lighting specialist in controls by the NAILD group for certification in lighting controls capabilities. That's what we're going to talk about today. But also, huge shout out to our sponsor for this episode. We could not do these without you. The DALI Alliance is sponsoring this episode. If you're unfamiliar with this group and you don't know how to spell DALI, which is D-A-L-I, it is the group in charge of the Open Standard Protocol, which is DALI, and they also do DALI 2, DALI Plus, and D4I. And we've actually had the general manager of DALI on the show a couple of times now. And so check out those episodes if you haven't heard them before. But basically, this is kind of the way of the future. And you may, if you're familiar with the older format of DALI, kind of forget that and start refreshing your knowledge on DALI too, because that is a much better, more robust protocol and definitely worth your time checking it out. Additionally, they're going to have their DALI Summit, which is going to follow NY Controlled in October. So check out how to get registered for the DALI Summit, which is going to happen in New York City. But until then, let's get into the conversation. So today we have all three of us being Ron Kuszmar, Webster Marsh, and Chris O'Shea. We are the three instructors of the NAILD LSC, which I plugged a little bit ago. But, the basics of this episode is kind of a debrief of what we had done at our inaugural event back in June 2025. And we learned a lot. We also taught a lot, and we also really kind of went through a lot of interesting experiences trying to get people up to a skilled level in lighting controls. And so Chris only ended up with one student, but it was still a really good class where they managed to go through the same steps as what we had planned. But it was a little bit unexpected. And then Ron had a pretty sizable class equal to mine. And then I also had a sizable class. But to kind of give people an idea, if you haven't heard us talk about this before, this is certification aimed at distributors in electrical distribution to get them to be able to do lighting controls. And what we had done was we broke it up into 3 tracks. So Ron was in charge of the distribution track, which would be sort of what we discovered was the entry level for this certification. Then I did the design track, which was a little bit more advanced, but kind of elevating distributors who do lighting controls takeoffs to the ability to do lighting controls design work where you don't have anything to take off. And then Chris was to do the installation track, which was basically the expert level as we discovered on this journey. But I want to kind of go to you, Chris, before at first, because out of curiosity, with your experience in this certification program, what was your expectation and what was the reality of what it was?
Wow, and yeah, those were 3 very different things. And
Chris holding up 4 fingers for those who don't have video.
We certainly expected that we were going to have a class of distributors or non-technical or people who wanted to learn more about the installation end of the program. But I think as the program went on, including the seminars that we did ahead of time, the online seminars that we did, I think people had a different attitude about what it was really all about. And therefore, there were some changes, there were some class changes, there were some people who didn't come. So I think part of it was us not necessarily being a little more specific about what it was we were doing. So I think between the original intent and what we ended up with was very extreme difference, but that's okay. Like you said, this was a learning experience for us as well, and we needed to understand this. Um, Now, I wouldn't have necessarily confessed that I only had one student. I would have somehow made it sound like it's still a class of 1,000 people. Um, and listen, I don't mind that. I don't think he would mind even if I name him. It was Nathan Williams from Williams Service Company. And Nathan's a technician. He's a lifelong technician, and our career-long technician. And he even just started his own company that's very similar to Control Force, a company that is focused on strictly service. So it was a tremendous opportunity for not only me to sit down with Nathan and review all this information and talk to him, not just as a student, but as someone who could teach the class himself. And so his perceptions of the terminology we're using, the best practices that we're putting forward, the rules of engagement when you're doing a job. So it really, for me, was not only very different in how the class moved forward, but it was very different on what I got out of it as well.
Right.
And you couldn't have bought that from anybody. And I've said it before, I'd like to think toward that end that the manufacturers who came in and participated in this program with us benefited from that opportunity to sit down with a couple of experienced technicians discussing their product and ways to market it or sell it or promote it. So the answer is it was a very different from the original perception to what we ended up with was very different, but it was encouraging. It really just confirmed that this is something that we need. And I think that the lack of attendance is just the way we handle it. And we've already discussed options and how we can move forward to smarten that up a bit. But
Totally.
After doing this program and talking to a few distributors, it's clear to me that this is something that really needs to be done, and we need to keep moving forward with this program.
No, absolutely. And I think that is really the benefit is to everyone in this, whether they're the manufacturers, whether they're the students, whether they're us, whether they're, people who have a stake in the industry. There's a clear beneficial result from having people who are certified, especially distributors in lighting controls, but also from your track having skilled technicians even further involved in this. So, I think it's a really great win-win situation. Ron, from your perspective, going in with what you had an expectation for and then what you got, what are your thoughts?
So I want to start, and I want to say one thing is while this was put on by NAILD and very focused on distributors, it became very apparent very quickly that this class is for anybody in the industry.
Sure.
And NAILD was very open about that, right? So moving forward, that is one thing. NAILD was very open about having non-members available to take this class. So if you're listening, if you're watching, and you're in the lighting industry, whether you're at a dealer integrator or you work at a rep agency and you're working on getting your controls knowledge up, any position where you're looking to advance your knowledge in lighting controls, whether that's on the design side, the distribution side, which we'll talk about, while we were focused on distribution, it wasn't just distribution. It was that role, which, includes doing takeoffs and putting together bill of materials. And so it's not just distribution. So I will say, as we look forward, anyone who's listening to this, don't get stuck on the fact that it was NAILD and distributors, because this is something that everybody in the industry can benefit from. Sure. I will say, though, that I think my expectations were that we could get a lot more done in the time that we had than we could. And I sometimes think I take for granted how long we've been doing this and been in the industry,
Yeah.
and it's like, Chris has obviously been doing this longer than you and I have, right? But like, you do take that for granted when you've been doing
Yeah.
something for a while, and it's just sort of second nature to you, and you expect, oh, okay, we can get through X, Y, and Z, and then you get into class thinking that people are at least at some sort of base level, and then realizing
Mhm.
like they've never touched this software in their lives.
Right.
Okay, let's scale back expectations and revise to meet the needs of our students. And so I think we learned a lot. We learned a lot from our students. Obviously we know what we
Mhm.
want to sort of tweak and change moving forward. But everyone got it. It was 2 very intense days. There's
Yeah.
no question about that, and I think everyone got a lot out of it. So I'm glad we did everything, but yeah, there were quite a few expectations. I think that we all, we spent a lot of time, or you especially, Webster, right? You spent a lot of time on this, and Chris and I popped into an hour here, 2 hours there, put together some materials, and we're like, oh yeah, we can do all this. We can do all. And then it became very apparent. We're like, we cannot do all of this. So no,
Well, no, but
it was
I
good.
think that is from my personal perspective on pedagogy and educational focus, it's really important to pivot to meet your students' needs. And the goal of this certification is not you walk out of here with, being a perfect expert in lighting controls and can do exactly
100%.
what you and I do all the time. Um, it's more that we wanted to elevate people to the point where lighting controls is not this scary unknown entity, and that they see the reality of what we do on a day-to-day basis, which is we rifle through the cut sheets, we rifle through the installation instructions, we talk to the manufacturers nonstop to make sure that we understand the products through and through, because it's always changing and there's always a different approach to how to do lighting controls. And so, whether you're someone who just took the drawings and sent them off to the manufacturer and said, can you give me a system that meets this need? Or you're somebody who really can dig into the weeds and provide a solid lighting control solution. At the end of the day, if you know how to do lighting controls, you at least
Yep.
are that much higher and more capable than somebody who doesn't, and somebody who just immediately goes, I don't know, and I'm not going to try to dig into that. So the foundation of what we were trying to educate here was, how do you do lighting controls? And the fundamentals of how you do lighting controls really does kind of get distilled down to different levels, different skill sets. So the students in your class, had never used Bluebeam. Okay, great. Let's get them to use Bluebeam, which is an excellent tool, and
Mm-hmm.
help them kind of step forward and be capable in doing lighting controls from a minimalist but level that they can then grow upon. And then in my class, my students, the design students, were very skilled. They understood a lot more than it sounds like what your class understood, which was great because people kind of self assigned them to the right class. I had
Yep.
a couple of students who said, I think I'm in the wrong class because all of this is going way over my head. And I was like, great, let's move you into the distribution class, and where you can kind of get the stepping stones of where we're at in the design class. And I
Yep.
imagine that we actually had somebody who was originally assigned to the installation class who never showed up to the installation class and showed up in the design class, because similarly, I suspect they went, oh, whoa, this is way too elevated. Like, I need to dial this back, which is great because not only are they able to identify their own knowledge level, but then they can use that to identify where they need to find the information, because that was the other tool set that was really important, was, can you find the information? The exam was a
Yes.
completely open book exam.
Yep.
People could search the internet. The goal there was, let's make sure that if you're asked what part number means, you're going to be able to figure out where that information is located and how to make sure that the right part number is picked. And so that is really critical to the capabilities of a lighting control specialist. The thing that we never really got to probe, though, unfortunately, is the installation oversight project management work that was in your class, Chris. So, you know, going forward, we're looking at restructuring this whole thing, but at the same time, it's really what we're thinking of doing is designing it so that you basically can self-select. You can either self-select or test into the different tracks, and that way, if you already are at the design level, you don't need to go through the distribution level. But if you're at the distribution level, you absolutely should start at the distribution level. And so when people get to the installation track, they will have that foundational knowledge to be able to then work with the curriculum that Chris O'Shea put together, which will help elevate them to really more project manager level, not like technician level. But that was an interesting point that we discussed throughout this creation here, Chris, if you don't mind jumping in here and talking about that, which is the semantics of installation coordination versus project management.
Yeah, and it's easy to assess that almost on a daily basis, job by job, situation by situation. It becomes pretty clear, and it's let me explain just anecdotally what one of my typical conundrums is. I had a conversation with a lighting designer who said, I've got one guy who's specifying the system, another guy who's selling the system, and another guy who's starting it up. And the three of them don't even know each other, and they're not even talking. So,
Right.
That really hits home. And what we find out is something that, as you said, Webster, I've been in this business for 40 years. And there's one thing that I can guarantee in every project: lighting controls is the last thing that anybody is ever going to deal
Sure.
with. They don't understand it. They don't know what questions to ask. They don't know how to proceed. So when you talk about, the project management versus, actual startup, in my mind, what we need to teach these project managers to do is they've got to get on this job much sooner. And it's in what we call the form of a pre-wire visit. And this, in my mind, has become the single most important requirement on any controls job. Whoever is responsible for that startup needs to get on that job the minute that electrician starts laying out his equipment and wants to start doing his pipe and boxes. Right? They got to be there at that point, and they got to be guiding that electrician. And if that doesn't happen, then that's when you get a lot of the miscommunication. So that's a real big part of it. And I think that the technician, although it would be nice when you have a company like Control Force that we can have our technicians reach out for the job site much sooner. But you get a lot of technicians out there, and I'm going to be very plain about it, that are maybe working for rep agencies, and they're not getting involved ahead of time or even involved with the factory. Or the same person that does the pre-wire visit, if they do one, may not be the same person that goes back and does the startup. So it's become very clear to me where this industry stands with controls, and it hasn't progressed in 40 years. We're still waiting for the last minute. Nobody's asking the right questions. It just is. No one's ever putting these pieces together, and it just keeps festering and not improving necessarily. So I think that what we're kind of looking at is maybe there is a difference between teaching someone how to project manage a job versus teaching someone how to do a startup, which the startup portion of it or the technician portion of it may not necessarily need to be part of this program. I don't know that distributors necessarily are going to take it to that level. I think what we all agree is that an innovative distributor is someone who either has employees or has a relationship with a controls company. And I think that's what makes this program. So I think from a project management point of view, for a distributor to understand what is required on a typical controls project is just as important as understanding all the information or whatever we need to do the startup.
Totally. Totally. No, I think that that's really important. And while we don't necessarily have like modules dedicated to soft skills, we definitely try to incorporate soft skills into the certification program because, that is really an important key to successfully doing lighting controls. In my class, I'm not going to spill out exactly what I did because hopefully some people listening to this are going to be a student of mine, and I'll get to kind of blindside them with this in my class. But there's politics that you need to learn how to navigate, and if you don't prepare yourself for that, you could really end up in a real firestorm of blame game, or just basically saying, well, you stole this from me, so I'm going to steal this from you, and just getting into this really poor situation. And so if you can navigate these in a way that elevates you above it all, you can really kind of solidify yourself as someone that people would go to for help, because it's not about who's right or wrong, who's stealing what, or anything like that. It's more about, okay, we're here, how do we get away from here and find the solution? And that is also one of the big deals with lighting controls, is the fact that there's going to be times where there's poor coordination. Like you said, Chris, it's always at the last second. And so as a result, poor communication has been done up to that point. So when an LSC certified distributor gets pulled into a project, it's probably way behind on any kinds of coordination work. So, you kind of need to step in as that neutral party and say, okay, what's the story? What's going on here? And not try to necessarily profit off of it, but, protect your service fees, at the same time helping the clients, helping the customer, whoever that is, whether it's the contractor, the owner, whatever. But to your point, Ron, this really is open to anybody, and we, in fact, my class had people from all walks of life. I had utility groups, I had sales reps. There's a really good opportunity for people to take advantage of this resource. But from your perspective, being in charge of the distribution track, would you say that the curriculum as we're envisioning it now, would that be applicable to distributors and people who are brand new to lighting controls? And then after
absolutely.
that, we kind of, the point would be to test out and go start with the design track.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and at the heart of what we really focused on, and like you mentioned, protecting yourself, and that's really what we were focused on the whole time. Like, yes, we were there for lighting controls, but it was really about protecting yourself, your company. Things keep changing. The jobs keep changing. They get more and more complex depending on what state you're working in and what regulation. And this job was, on this electrical code, but this one's on this code. And just understanding the basics of how to read the drawing set, where the notes are hidden, how to read through the spec to make sure you're not being burned. Because what we found is most people do what the rest of the world does, which is you take your drawing set and you rip your pages and you send it to the manufacturer and you go, give me this control system, which is great. Except what do you do when the manufacturer misses all of your plug load controllers? And you've got the rest of your system, but not your plug load. And now you've sold that to your system, and especially distributors or a dealer, anyone, you are so close to your customers. So now your customer comes back to you and says, hey, this thing is missing. We need all of these. You can go back to the manufacturer and you can fight back and forth, and you may get some of it covered. You may get none of it covered. Odds are you're going to get left holding a portion of the bag, if not the whole thing. And so a lot of what we were focused on was just the basics of making sure that you understand what you're looking at. You don't have to know every part and piece as an entry level, but you should know I'm expecting X number of these types of lights, these power packs, these switches, these sensors, and get that bill of materials back and say, yes, I have, it looks like everything's here. Great. I can send this off. And that was the big part of what we were really focused on. And that affects everybody. If you're brand
Right.
new in the industry and you want to get into lighting controls, that's where you kind of need to start. You need to understand the basics of just how to go through a drawing set before you really get your hands on all the parts and pieces and figure out how to
Yeah.
design it and install it and wire it and commission it. And you kind of have to start at the beginning and progress through.
Right. Right. Well, and I think that that's a really important distinction there when it comes to skill set and knowledge, because of the fact that, you know, if you were to ask people who before they took the certification, you know, do you do lighting controls as a distributor, they would say yes.
Yep.
But that response is not aligned with what we envision that yes means. And so as a result, you know, we have this mismatch, and we also have a lot of distributors who are just sort of like, you know, yeah, I don't need to know a single thing about lighting controls to be able to do lighting controls. And it's like, maybe back in 1990, maybe. Not anymore. Nowadays,
Right.
there's so much changing, and there's so many requirements, especially when it comes to energy code. And so as a result, like you're pointing out, you know, it's like, yeah, what if the manufacturer misses this? If you don't understand how to read sheets and you don't understand how lighting controls work, you won't be able to check that work. And as a result, you're the one who's stuck with that bill, not the manufacturer. And so, you know, I think the other thing here is making sure, you know, you have a selection of brands, because as we were working through the curriculum, it became clear that with this project we had selected, not every brand could meet spec one-to-one.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question then becomes, okay, first of all, can you change the spec? But then also, if you can't change the spec, well, how do you make sure which manufacturer you're aligned with? And I don't think you really got to the point where you could really, you know, compare all of the different brands for this. I think you got to a point where it was like, okay, this is clearly the brand to pick. But you know, from, you know, when it comes to that sort of navigation, what did you do in the class?
Yeah, we did spend a decent amount of time talking about it. And I waited. It worked out well with our schedule with the manufacturers. And if we have not yet thanked the manufacturers again, thank you.
Absolutely.
Every manufacturer absolutely brought their A game. Every manufacturer had a 2-hour session for those of you who weren't there, and they were super engaging 2-hour sessions, which I know sounds crazy. People are like, oh, the 2 hours for each manufacturer talk about lighting controls. They were extremely engaging. But again, the manufacturers brought the best of the best. They brought their experts in the controls, in the equipment. They brought the people who do the trainings for their company on a regular basis. And it was extremely well done by every manufacturer. And so we waited until the end to go over that, which is how it kind of fell anyway. But at that point, they all had a pretty good understanding of, okay, but I'm supposed to have this, but that manufacturer doesn't actually have that thing. They have this thing, but it's not quite the same. So we talked about how to deal with substitution requests, and you know, it's close, but it's not exactly the same. So this is where, do you have a good relationship with your specifier? Can you have that conversation with them potentially, or with the, you know, designer? And, you know, how do you fill out that substitution request? But if you want to just, hey, I need to get this out, it's due tomorrow, and I need a 1-for-1, how do you identify quickly which manufacturer of yours you can actually use to cross this system if you're not working with basis of design? And they all got there to the same conclusion, which was great. But it really helped having the manufacturers go through all their lines rather than all of us just sitting there monotony, going through the monotony of
Right.
reading cut sheets and trying to look through this and then have them go, which manufacturer had that thing?
Yeah, well, and I think that was one of the goals of this certification, was to really impress upon them that there is no silver bullet. And so,
Right.
I don't think they really understood until they went through those demonstrations. Because during a demonstration, right in the middle of it, one of my students turns to me and was like, "Is it frustrating that every manufacturer has something different and they don't all have the same features and product?" And I was like, all the time, all the
Oh,
time. And it's not to blame anybody. I mean, the
No,
manufacturers
no.
are providing excellent services and products for the market they are targeting, because they
Yes.
are working in specific markets, and while they might be even adjacent to other markets, it's good to understand, like, okay, where's your wheelhouse as a manufacturer, and where can I apply you most consistently? But I think that is something that we really did succeed in impressing on the students, was this idea that it's good to have an array of options rather than just picking one brand and sticking with it.
Yep.
And so on the installation side, what was your experience with the demonstrations from the brands?
well, like I said, I think it took a little different spin with us because we were a little bit more focused on what they had to offer and options that they might not have, or ways they might consider doing things they might not have considered. And just to give it a simple example, if you're going to have a 0 to 10 volt power pack, it's nice to have an override button on it. When the contractor installs it, he can push that button and check and make sure it works. Don't need programming, don't need anything beyond that. It's a nice little feature to have. So I think that the
Yeah.
focus kind of shifted with them as far as we were concerned. I think what it comes down to, no matter who the manufacturer is, it has to really come down to the information that's available and the information they're pushing in the field. Um, submittal drawings are everything.
Hmm.
And I realize that submittal drawings, for the most part, are more to pacify the design community than they are the construction
Yeah.
community. But contractors need to see this information. So
Hmm.
I think what's important is
Yeah.
is that when these manufacturers are talking about startups and installation and all that, they need to recognize the documentation they put out there is critical. To not
Yes.
have an installation diagram for a part is tragic.
Right.
And it's not that they're not doing it, or they're not interested. It's just they haven't gotten around to it, or it's a new product or whatever. But I think that no matter who you use as a manufacturer, the process and procedure in the field needs to be the same. And guys,
Hmm.
we spent a lot of time talking about terminology, right? And what
Yes.
and what we find is that manufacturers want to do this with terminology.
Yeah.
They're not
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
do
They want
this.
to
They don't
separate.
want to all
Yeah.
use the same language and be the same. So, we could sit down and say, okay, well, Wattstopper uses the word bind. Nobody else uses the word
Hmm.
bind. Acuity's
Right.
all about channels. Lutron's all about zones. We could go through all that. But the bottom line is, if you don't want to get too caught up in the equipment, I'm a startup agent. I don't care what the equipment is. I'll start up anything. Give it to me and we'll take care of it. But what we get from the factory, the information that's put out there in the field, and the process and the procedure that leads up to it has got to be consistent from manufacturer to
Right.
manufacturer.
Right.
And clearly it is not. And clearly there are
No.
gaps in everybody's program.
Well, and that's
Yeah.
that's an argument for this certification even further on the project management installation side, because of the fact that it's inconsistent. And so as a
Yep.
result, people need to be taught, like, just because you know how to start up this system doesn't mean you know how to start up every system. It means you need to weed through the documentation and understand the differences between one system and the other. So I think that right there is the huge argument for people to take the installation track, is to identify those inconsistencies and be prepared for them. um, but we're almost out of time here, and instead of doing a wrap up, I figured we could just do final thoughts. So, Ron, I'll start with you on final thoughts
Yeah.
about the NAILD LST.
I would say overall, super successful first class. The students were engaged, they were amazing, and everyone, including us, got a lot out of it. And if you're listening, be on the lookout for the next NAILD LSC, because there will be more, and you should absolutely consider going. Or maybe you know someone in your organization who should be going and who isn't listening to the podcast, who you could also turn them on to. That's a separate subject for a different time. But definitely be on the lookout. We're going to do this again, and it's only going to get better and bigger, and take advantage of, sort of introductory pricing. I know even this next session is going to go up, but I think over time, as we continue this to grow, it's only going to probably get more expensive as the training material and everything else increases as well. So take advantage, get in on the ground floor.
And Chris, do you want to do final thoughts?
Yeah, I think, and I've said it before. I think this effort was a confirmation of sorts. It was a validation that what we're doing is good and needed and right. And the story that I like to tell is that when we had our final exam, circumstance put us all into one room. So we had one big room with all our students in the same room. Webster up front administering the exam. Ron back in the corner grading his exams in the middle of nowhere. I got a great photograph of him in this vast big room. But at the same time, I was watching the students. I was standing in the back of the room, and I was focused on the students, and everybody was engaged. There wasn't a single person on their phone, looking at their email, watching videos, or on Slack or anything like that. Their screens all had cut sheets up. They were looking at things. They were asking questions. And that was wonderful. And like I said, I have a photograph of that as proof. It really was, to me, the confirmation that this is the right thing. People are interested. They want to learn. And they are learning. And to me, that was very clear in the whole process.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's a really great anecdotal part of this whole thing, was that the exam day, because we unfortunately had some technological difficulties and people couldn't actually do the written portion of the exam. So what we did was, as a group, we went through the exam and debated the answers together. And I mean, again, from my standpoint, they passed because they showed that affinity towards pushing for the right answer. Some people pointed out the semantical differences between some of the answers that were in there. And that was the point. That was some of those questions were massive curveballs with intention of being massive curveballs, because you're going to get that all the time. And so making sure that you have that affinity towards, okay, you're using that word, but is that actually the word that you want to use, is the right way to approach lighting controls right now. And so, that was way more important for me to see than making sure that they all answer the question one at a time in the correct format, because they all I did push some of them, because some of them were being quiet. So I silenced half the group and said, okay, only this group can answer, so that, they all got pushed. Because that was the point. It's not perfection. It's not expertise. It is, more now, and you know how to do this. You know how to open up a cut sheet. You know how to go to the website. So getting them to that point was really amazing. It was amazing to see, because they actually pushed back on me, which was awesome, because I wanted them to push back on me. I wanted them to say, well, Webster, the answer says this, but is that the right answer? Why would it say that? And sometimes it was like, good point. That wasn't the right way to say that. So it was awesome to get that feedback in real time too. But overall, it was a really incredible experience, and it just made this certification all the more better for when we're going to do it again. We're looking at January, same location, Dallas Market Center, and hopefully people who did not attend the first round are going to be there again, because this is only going to get better. It's only going to improve. And when you get this you become a part of this community, which we're hoping to build. This group of lighting controls specialists focused in the distribution area, but at the end of the day, it's anybody. Again,
Mhm.
sales reps, distributors, designers, anybody who has an interest in doing lighting controls and wants this certification to back up that they know what they're doing. So, yeah, I'm going to pass it back over to you, Ron, to finish us out.
Yeah, awesome. No, it was a ton of fun. I can't wait to do it again. So we will see you guys in January. Be on the lookout. I will close this out and remind everyone today's episode is presented by the LCA, the Lighting Controls Association.
And it's financially supported by the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, or NAILD. Check out our website, lightingcontrolspodcast.com. Got all of our episodes and information about the NAILD LSC. Check it out. But also, huge shout out to our sponsor for this episode. We could not do these episodes without Dolly Alliance. Thank you for sponsoring this episode. If you're unfamiliar with these guys, you should check them out. DALI Alliance, ALLIANCE.com. Or sorry, .org. My apologies. So dolly-alliance.org. Check them out. They're the group in charge of the open standard Dolly, and maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't, but you should definitely check it out because it is starting to really enter the North American market. Finally, we're seeing some movement on that, and it's an excellent protocol. You should really get familiar with it because it really provides a lot of solutions for some of the challenges that we're dealing with in the North American lighting controls market. So, get familiar. Also, watch the episodes we've had Paul Drosen on. He's general manager of the Dolly Alliance, and he has a lot to say. He's very knowledgeable, and we'll definitely have him back on in the future. But until then, thank you for joining us, and gentlemen, thank you for an awesome conversation.